Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 12th of August. I'm Stephen Carroll in London. Coming up today, China and the United States extend their tariff truce into early November, easing fears of an escalation between the world's largest economies. Why the Oasis comeback tour looks set to worsen the UK's inflation woes. Plus, as Donald Trump appoints a conservative economist to lead the Bureau of Labour Statistics, we dig into why US data matters so much to the global economy. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Washington and Beijing have agreed to extend tariffs at current levels until at least the 10th of November. The move maintains the trade status quo between the world's two largest economies, following a series of tit-for-tat hikes and export restrictions on rare earth magnets and certain technologies. John Gong is a professor at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing.
If you look at the statistics, America's share of total China's exports has been steadily coming down. It has come down to a little bit over 9%, which is not something that's sort of very significant, totally indispensable to China. So I think China is ready to respond every time Washington slaps on high tariffs, and Washington takes precautions for this kind of a reaction. So I think we're in this kind of a very delicate equilibrium, and this is going to be continuing for some time.
John Gong was speaking after President Trump announced the extension of the truce in a Truth Social post. The two sides reached the initial 90-day pause in May, under which the US lowered its duties on Chinese goods to 30%, while Beijing reduced levies on US products to 10% and agreed to resume rare earth exports. The chief economist of the Conservative Republican think tank, the Heritage Foundation, E.J. Antoni, has been named the next head of the US Bureau of Labour Statistics. President Donald Trump posted online that Antoni would ensure future data releases are, quote, honest and accurate. The previous head of the data gathering agency was fired after a weak jobs report and was accused of manipulating the figures for political reasons. Bloomberg senior editor Derek Wallbank says the firing has shaken faith in the impartiality of US economic data.
This has been a period of intense media focus for BLS, the likes of which I cannot remember in my long career of covering the United States government. This is a pretty unusual situation. And Antoni will be under an exorbitant amount of pressure to prove to lawmakers and to prove to economists and to market participants that the BLS numbers are accurate, they were accurate, and they will be accurate.
Bloomberg senior editor Derek Wallbank there. Jason Furman, who chaired President Obama's Council of Economic Advisers, criticised Trump's choice, describing Antoni as an extreme partisan. His nomination will need to be confirmed by the Senate. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says he thinks he could have made the markets react positively to Trump's tariff announcement on Liberation Day. In an exclusive interview for Bloomberg Businessweek, the magazine looks at how the Treasury Secretary became the Trump cabinet member that Wall Street trusts. Bloomberg's James Wilcock has more.
Many traders look to Scott Bessent as a moderator, someone who reins in the White House's impulses. But the Treasury Secretary tells Bloomberg Businessweek he merely advises Donald Trump, helping him translate his populism into economic policy. The modest approach can't hide that Bessent has been tapped to take on some of the most difficult assignments of Trump's second term. But despite being the favourite on Wall Street, one area the Treasury Secretary hasn't yet managed to grip is the US fiscal deficit, which he campaigned on getting down to 3%, but is now set to grow after blockbuster tax cuts. In London, James Wilcock, Bloomberg Radio.
Expectations for a summit deal with Russia's Vladimir Putin were downplayed during the latest White House press conference. The US president cast the talks, scheduled for the 15th of August in Alaska, as a feel-out meeting and said he would speak to other international leaders afterwards.
I'm going to go and see the parameters. Now, I may leave and say, good luck. And that'll be the end. I may say this is not going to be settled. I think if it weren't for me, he would not be even talking to anybody else right now. But I'm going to meet with him. We're going to see what the parameters are. I'm then going to call up President Zelensky and the European leaders.
Donald Trump was speaking as Ukraine and its European allies have been pushing for a halt to the fighting and a freezing of the current front line as a first step before talks on a more enduring settlement. Washington DC's police department is set to be placed under federal control, according to a White House announcement. The US president also confirmed he would deploy 800 National Guard troops to the country's capital. He says the measures are designed to fight crime in the area. Statistics in the US Justice Department show that violent crimes in Washington reached a 30-year low in 2024. Reacting to the news, DC Mayor Muriel Bowser says the decision was not completely unexpected.
We are American citizens. Our families go to war. We pay taxes and we uphold the responsibilities of citizenship. And while this action today is unsettling and unprecedented, I can't say that given some of the rhetoric of the past, that we're totally surprised.
Washington DC Mayor Muriel Bowser speaking there. Donald Trump has also threatened to insert federal personnel into other cities, including New York and Chicago, if they do not crack down on what he's calling out of control crime. And tepid growth in the feed-through of April's business tax hikes are already on the Bank of England's worry list, but new analysis suggests they should also be keeping an eye on Manchester band Oasis. Bloomberg's Ewan Potts has the story.
It's been one of the most hyped events of the year. The blockbuster comeback tour by Oasis has been a sellout success. But analysis by economists suggests it could leave something of a hangover for the Bank of England, lifting inflation by as much as 4 basis points. Capital Economics flagged one of the Manchester concert dates as being especially problematic, coming just one day after an ONS data collection point. The good news is the effect is likely to be temporary, so perhaps the advice for the Bank of England will be don't look back in anger. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Radio.
And those are your top stories on the markets. Eurostoxx 50 futures are up by 0.4%. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index is 0.5% higher, being driven higher by Japanese stocks mainly, which are back open after being closed yesterday. The Nikkei in Tokyo up by 2.4%. The RBA has cut their cash rate target by 25 basis points to 3.6% this morning. The Aussie dollar now 0.2 weaker against the US dollar. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is down by 0.1%, and gold prices are up 0.4 after yesterday's fall as well, and the announcement by Donald Trump that gold bars will not face tariffs, despite some of the confusion around that issue in the past week. Gold's trading at $3,354 a troy ounce. In a moment, we'll bring you more on the US-China trade truce being extended, plus what does Donald Trump's choice to lead the American Statistics Agency mean for US data? But another story that I've been reading this morning about trying to understand what connects Labubus and Dubai chocolate. I know this isn't a social media buzzword randomizer. Bloomberg's Amanda Mull has been writing about some of the internet's biggest consumer trends of recent months, including the little fluffy monster dolls and the pistachio and pastry cream-filled chocolate, both of which have been popularised thanks to social media. She compares them to the crazes of the 80s and 90s, think Beanie Babies, and she says that it's a sign that the current crop of trends is the first to have fully moved past the traditional mode of cultural origination, which requires that products have some relationship to how people live and how they think about their real life. In the social internet, even if you're not liking or sharing social media posts that feature these products, the fact that you pause in your feed to look at them is enough to propel them into more of other people's feeds. Thus the effect multiplies. Thus we end up with a craze like Labubus. By the way, Lafufu dolls, the fake version, also a big part of that trend as well. But what Amanda is getting to in this piece is that the sort of method by which things become massive crazes is essentially how one traditionally would have marketed to children. Things being strange or cute or delicious looking or outrageous or confusing are the currency in the current world. But she says all is not lost, because at least these trends do require people to put down their phones and leave the house to try and participate in them as well. So we haven't completely lost a connection to physical reality yet. You can read the piece by Amanda Mull on Bloomberg.com and on the terminal. We'll put a link to it in our podcast show notes as well. Well, let's bring you up to date then on the trade story. The extension of that truce between the US and China until November. Jenny Marsh, who leads Bloomberg's team covering China's economy and government, joins us now for more. So, Jenny, is this truce then a sign that progress is being made on some of Donald Trump's complaints about the trade relationship with China?
I think it's a positive sign for the relationship. The talks are going well. both sides sort of emerged from the last round of trade talks in Sweden, saying that they plan to extend this 90 days. So it's a sign that communication's going well. However, it still leaves China as one of the last countries in the world to actually secure a trade deal with the US. So, on the one hand, it's a sign that they're continuing to talk and hash things out. But on the other, a lot remains uncertain. And there's a lot of disagreements left in the relationship that they still need to sort of work out. Tariffs on China are still around 55% right now. So, it's good in the short term, but when you look at the bigger picture, there's still a lot here to be sort of concerned about.
One of the positive signals that we had was out of the chip sector yesterday, where there had been talk that big companies like Nvidia and AMD would be allowed to get export licenses to be able to export chips to China if they gave up 15% of their revenue to the US government. But we've been reporting this morning that China's urged companies in the country to avoid using Nvidia's H20 processors, particularly for government-related purposes. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, it's kind of a fascinating standoff. So the Trump administration put restrictions on the H20 chips earlier this year. Obviously, these chips were designed by NVIDIA specifically for China to comply with the Biden administration's chip curbs. And after the sort of the latest round of trade talks, the US said that releasing these chips was going to be sort of one of the concessions. And it seems it's a concession the Chinese did not ask for and don't want. And that is now made clear by these letters that have gone out, urging companies to sort of think twice before they buy them. And the reason here is kind of simple. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, said that the US wants to get China addicted to American technology, and China doesn't want to become an addict of the US tech stack. It wants its own companies. It wants Huawei to be able to develop its own tech. And if they're able to get these low-end chips, then it takes the sort of urgency away from its own national champions. So China is sort of saying, no, this isn't what we want. I think also it's a sign to the US that what they want from these trade talks is much bigger than these sort of H20 chips, which are sort of fourth generation technology. They want something much bigger for the leverage which they have over the US.
So where are the key areas that we should be watching as those talks continue over some of the sticking points?
The rules around export controls, I think, is a fascinating space right now because you have the Chinese pushing, and they have this advantage with their chokehold on rare earth magnets, which we saw earlier this year. The US economy is desperate for it and needs and can't replace right now. So they still have that, and they're going to try and crack open these export controls as widely as they can. You had Trump talking last night about the Blackwell chip, which is a much more advanced technology, and how there could be some sort of modified version of that. So that's definitely one area. The US has widened these trade talks away from just talking about, rebalancing trade to also including China's purchases of Russian oil, which India obviously has paid a high price for in recent weeks. China buys more oil from Russia than India does. So that's another area. And Trump was posting on social media late last night about China's soybean purchases, saying that he hopes China can quadruple its purchases of that, which would be a problem for Brazil, which China buys a lot of soybean from right now. So agriculture is another big area. Likely, this is all leading up to a big Trump-Xi summit in China later this year. And I feel like we're not going to see the details of the deal until both men get together and sort of give it their official sign-off. But I think these are the areas they're going to be talking about in the months before then.
OK, Jenny Marsh, leading our team covering China's economy and government. Thank you very much. Now, Donald Trump has named E.J. Antoni, chief economist of the Conservative Heritage Foundation, to lead the Bureau of Labour Statistics. That's after the US president fired the former head of the agency following revisions to the jobs data earlier this month. Bloomberg opinion columnist Daniel Moss joins me now for more. Daniel, first of all, what is the significance of appointing someone like E.J. Antoni to lead the statistics agency?
Well, the significance is his credentials in Trump world would appear to be unimpeachable. He worked at the Heritage Foundation, a right-wing think tank that had a role in crafting the infamous Project 2025 agenda, and he was pushed for this job by Steve Bannon. He reportedly went on Steve Bannon's podcast after the July jobs report were published recently, and effectively made his pitch for the job. Now, that's not to say necessarily that we should look at every number published by the Bureau of Labour Statistics as tainted by partisan inclinations. There is an army of civil servants who take their roles seriously, who approach their work with professionalism. It's going to be interesting to see. This job also requires Senate confirmation, I might add.
You've been writing about how the quality of American data has long been the envy of much of the world. Are any of Donald Trump's criticisms of the BLS legitimate?
So I published a column on this today. That column was written before this appointment was announced, I should stress that. The BLS is an agency not without its issues. They're just not necessarily the ones that the president asserts that it has. So before I became an opinion columnist, my job was to run Bloomberg News' economic coverage, 10 years of which I spent in Washington, D.C., paying very close attention to those numbers that would roll at 8:30 a.m. Washington time. I never saw anything in that to suggest that numbers were finessed, massaged, cast to paint the administration of the day in positive light. But that doesn't mean that this is a perfect place. Nor does it mean the whiff of politics is entirely absent from the Department of Labor. In 2012, an election year, the Department of Labor tried to greatly constrain access of the media to the media lockups. Full disclosure, I testified to Congress on that issue. An agreement was eventually reached with the Department of Labor. Funnily enough, Trump abolished those lockups subsequently in his first term. There's also been issues regarding correspondence of BLS economists with major Wall Street firms about potentially sensitive aspects of the data. There's also been a number of stories published in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal testifying to staffing shortages. So, look, it's not an agency, that deserves its place, in the pantheon. But I haven't seen anything to suggest it's politically biased. Not yet. Not yet.
With your global experience, though, can you put this in the context of how respected US data is in other parts of the world? And I suppose how it compares to other places where perhaps the same positive things can't be said about the quality of the data?
So look, for all its flaws, it is considered the gold standard, not just within the United States, but around the world. So I've reported statistics from countries which, at various points in their political and economic development, let's just say they resembled, aspects of the bendy fruit. And by that, I mean banana republics. Jason Furman talked about a banana republic after the BLS commissioner was fired. Janet Yellen's talked about a banana republic for the way Jay Powell is heavy to reduce interest rates. Look, in Southeast Asia, pre-1997-98 financial crisis, publication of stats was completely haphazard. Yet these were the economies we were told we had to emulate. Even in Japan, a very sophisticated economy in many ways, should have known better. I was horrified in early 1999, sitting at my desk in Tokyo, getting ready for a GDP report, to find it was published almost in its entirety in the Nikkei newspaper. And then we've got to ask the minister about this. We've got to get on this. Something's not right here. So it's just the way it's done. So, look, whatever flaws the BLS has, it is light years from some of the other places I've worked. And people talk about banana republics. Well, I've seen some practices that might fairly qualify for that.
So is the quality and the respect for the data in the US in question if we do see the BLS become politicised?
If we see the data being shaped to suit the political agenda of the administration, then yes, that's obviously a huge cause for concern. It's worth noting that not all of the most sensitive economic data is provided by the Department of Labour and the Department of Commerce. Let's not forget them. Some of the most market-moving numbers are published by the Institute for Supply Management. The ADP jobs report was for a long time considered a kind of shadow non-farm payroll number, though, there's a debate about how closely it merits that. Global PMIs 20 years ago, they didn't attract anything like the attention they attract today. But at the end of the day, you just can't get past the need for credible US economic statistics. It's not just about forecasting. Global markets, the biggest securities markets in the world, and even some of the smallest ones, respond overwhelmingly to the data published by the Department of Commerce and the Department of Labour at 8:30 a.m. DC time. For all the talk about the rise of Asia, look at any Asian market stories on a Monday morning. It's all about the US data released 72 hours earlier.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.